Okay, go.
His vision from the constantly passing bars has grown so weary that it cannot hold anything else. It seems to him there are 1,000 bars, and behind the bars, no world. So this stanza makes it pretty clear that we're discussing... Oh, the title of the poem is The Panther, and so it makes it pretty clear that we're discussing a panther in a zoo. His vision from the constantly passing bars has grown so weary he's tired of being in this zoo, I suppose. It cannot hold anything else other than the bars. To him, there are 1,000 bars and no world. Only the bars. The only thing that he has left to know is his captivity. Next stanza. As he paces in cramped circles over and over, the movement of his powerful soft strides is like a ritual dance around a center in which a mighty will stands paralyzed. This stanza, of course, is the imagery of a big cat in captivity pacing, as they do, oftentimes back and forth. But this one is in a circle, and the concept that is brought up is that perhaps it is a dance around a center where a mighty will, I assume his will, stands paralyzed. He's been paralyzed, and despite the fact that big cats commonly are portrayed to want nothing more than their freedom and their ability to exist in nature, that for him has been paralyzed, and now he is just performing a dance around the fact that he has this will that wishes to be free. Last stanza. Only at times the curtain of the pupils lifts quietly, an image enters in, rushes down through the tensed, arrested muscles, plunges into the heart, and is gone. This last stanza elicits the image of a concept of, I suppose, the realization of the previously mentioned paralyzed will. The curtain of the pupils lifts quietly. That's an interesting concept, because it's saying that his realization, or his acceptance of his captivity, is in the eyes and is in his perception, and occasionally it lifts. Occasionally his perception, his realization that he is encaptured, is removed, and suddenly he sees, considering Maria, she says the curtain of the pupils lifts. I assume that she means that then the truth is seen by this panther, and the image that enters in is the truth of its captivity and its will to be free. It rushes through the tensed, arrested muscles, plunges into the heart, and is gone. So the concept of missing the wild and desiring to not be curtailed hits it, and then suddenly is gone. I suppose tying back into the earlier stanzas of its being held captive, it's losing the concept of its captivity due to, I suppose, the length of its captivity.
Any other thoughts in closing on the poem as a whole?
Zoos are fucked up, man. No, I think the poem as a whole, it seems a little simplistic, and unless I'm missing something in it, it seems to be the sort of poem that you can just sort of take at face value. There's a lot of imagery, a lot of the descriptive words are positive in terms of the physical being of a panther. But then in the final stanza, it breaks down. It's talking about it in the terms of its captivity. It describes it as having tense, arrested muscles. But early in the poem, it refers to the movement of the panther as powerful, soft strides, which is much more positive. Also, the poem is written in a rhyming structure. It uses some slant rhymes.
I probably should have prefaced this by letting you know that it's translated from German.
Oh my God! From Aleman. Allah, Berga, Aleman. I don't know much German. That's interesting. I don't know. That doesn't add or subtract anything to me for this. I don't know German well enough to give that a filter. But I think that it's definitely a comment on the cruelty of zoos or of animal captivity for spectacle. Or even not even necessarily for spectacle, because at no point is there any mention of an audience. It only mentions the bars. It only mentions being held in captivity, and it seems to portray a very negative concept of that from the author or from the poetess. But no, I think it pretty simply is attempting to convey a concept of the cruelty of captivity of big cats. Or perhaps animals in general, but big cats specifically.
Let's debrief.
Okay.
It's interesting that you only consider this poem in terms of the literal analysis, interpretation of it being a big cat in a zoo, which, when this poem was introduced to me, it was front-loaded. Do you know what I mean by front-loaded? It was prefaced by them showing a video where it was used in a film where Robert De Niro is paralyzed. And now that might have tainted my perception of it, but it got me at least thinking. I didn't think of it in terms of paralysis, but it did open it up to me to think, is this just about a panther? Which it might well not be.
Oh, and that's a very good point. It seemed simple and pretty clearly pointed towards a big cat. But now that you mentioned that, the word paralyzed is used point blank. There's no question about that. So it could very possibly be meant to be a grand metaphor about a person or another being other than a big cat in captivity that was in some way barred from the existence that it wanted to have to be fulfilled. That's actually a very interesting bit of information. If I had known that before reading the poem, it probably would have very much changed my interpretation of it.
And I think that's unfair, because it's tainting your interpretation of the poem with someone else's interpretation.
I don't think that it's unfair. I think that it's an interesting thing because of the fact that if someone else read this and told me that they believed that it was about pain pill addiction, it would then change my interpretation, but not necessarily in a bad way.
Do you think that if someone told you it was about pain pill addiction, or prefaced it with some kind of video where people are taking pain pills while the video is read over the top of it, do you think that you would have been just as likely to reach a conclusion about it being about a paralyzed man? Or do you think that you would have automatically gravitated more towards it being about pain pill addiction and nothing else?
I think that if I had been given the concept of a pain pill addiction, I would have been somewhere stuck between that interpretation and the big cat interpretation. I don't think that I would have, because of the pain pill interpretation, also drawn out the paralyzed man interpretation. I don't think that would have hit me without someone suggesting it, to be perfectly honest. Despite the mention of the word paralyzed, I don't think that I would have gravitated towards the concept of the panther as a man, because obviously the being in captivity, and especially with the concept of paralyzation, it ties in a lot of images, in my mind at least, or concepts of castration, or of which is very similar. It ties in a lot of ways with captivity, for regardless of whether it's a big cat or a tortoise, that is, I would say, especially with this debrief conversation, I would say that is the theme of the poem is castration, not in a physical, virile sense, but in a sense of the removal of
virility.
I don't want to be gender biased here, but the removal of manhood, the removal of the thing that makes the thing what it is.
Well, a panther is a very visually loaded, image.
For sure. Have you ever watched videos of one just chilling? They're crazy.
Right. Did the image and symbolism that comes with a panther play any part in your interpretation of the poem? Or
I would say that it definitely did, because if the name of the poem was, say, I don't know, The Naked Mole Rat, and it was the exact same poem, it would have quite possibly hit me very differently, because of the fact that I think big cats are a very heavily and commonly across nations used image for stunted freedom and I don't know. I guess a freedom or a sense of wholeness in the world that has been inhibited by outside forces, because the majority of them being human, but not necessarily all, I suppose. Without human interaction, big cats, such as panthers, would have a much better world to live in. Which, with the other notes that we've been considering, if without the existence of the non-paralyzed man, the paralyzed man would also have a much better existence if all men were paralyzed, But I think that the name of it being the panther definitely elicited some concepts for me that... Okay, if it had been named the panther and it was not using imagery such as constantly passing bars, growing weary, behind the bars, no world. If it had not been named the panther, perhaps those lines would not have carried the weight in my mind of the castration, the loss of freedom, and the loss of your natural habitat, I suppose. If it was called The Man, then I would have probably gravitated much, much more towards a concept of an incarcerated individual as opposed to just a captive life form. And then it would have turned more into... the interpretation would have changed quite a bit. So the panther being the title definitely affected how I approached the poem.
Excellent. Let me